This is Randy Spivey, CEO and founder of CPPS, the Center for Personal Protection and Safety. And because this is October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, I want to take just a couple of minutes to talk about why, when we put together workplace violence prevention holistic programs, do we include the topic of domestic violence as a potential cause of workplace violence. And the reason for that, there are several. And one of them is that when you look at the ASIS national standard on what is included in a comprehensive workplace violence program, and specifically in the awareness level training for all employees, it outlines 5 areas that need to be included in that awareness level training. The first is defining what workplace violence is. The second is highlighting what are potential behaviors of concern or red flags that are indicators and visible indicators that somebody might be progressing towards violence. The third area that's required in that awareness training is when an employee would see it, who do they report it to? What are the reporting procedures within an organization? Fourth area has to do with extreme violence or active shooter or active assailant. If somebody comes into the workspace with a gun, how do you respond? And how do you respond effectively? What are your options? But the fifth area is, they say you need to train what are the indicators that somebody might be in a domestic violence relationship. And so why is that required? Well, there's two reasons. Number one is the prevalence of domestic violence in our society. It was a big issue before the pandemic. It's more of an issue now. In the case of, the latest statistics show about 1 out of 3 women either have been, are in, or someday will be in a domestic violence relationship. For men, it's around 1 out of 6 or 1 out of 7, and it can be in same-sex relationships. But the key here is that if you think about how many employees work where you're at, how large is your workforce, and let's say you have 1,000 employees, and if half of those are women, well, you probably have a handful of individuals that are actually in a domestic violence relationship right now. And so then why is that important if you know it's there? But the second reason is because of how dangerous domestic violence issues can be. In fact, if you talk to law enforcement, there's one type of radio call they don't want to show up to more than any other, and it's a domestic disturbance. And the reason that law enforcement doesn't want to deal with that, or they realize the potential danger for it, is because how volatile and extremely dangerous those can be. They would rather raid a meth lab than show up to a domestic disturbance. And so what happens sometimes is you'll have the person's being abused, they call the police show up, they start to handcuff and arrest the abuser, and then as they're pulling this person away, the person that called the police turns on the police. If you watch the news over the last 12 to 18 months, there have been a number of cases across the country where 1 or 2 or 3 law enforcement professionals show up to a house to serve an order or in response to a phone call, and the person that's doing the abuse actually winds up killing the law enforcement professionals. So it's a very dangerous. So when we talk about how do we keep our workspace safe, it's critical that if that's how law enforcement looks at this issue, it's when we talk about how do we keep our workspaces safe, it's critical that we take on what seemingly seems to be a personal issue, and it is, but it has implications for the workspace and for our work environments. And for example, domestic violence is all about control. The abusive partner wants to control money. They want to control who the other person is talking to, who they're hanging out with. They want to control their kids if there are kids. They want to control, I said finances already, but they want to control everything. And the ultimate challenge to that control is when the person that's being abused said, I've had enough and I'm going to leave the relationship. And now he doesn't know where she lives, but odds are he knows where she works. And what that can do is put a bullseye right on the workspace. And roughly 25 to 30% of shootings inside a workspace are coming out of a domestic violence relationship. So knowing that and knowing the prevalence and then the potential lethality, we make a statement, and I rarely make black and white statements as related to any types of the safety training that we do, but I do on this one, and that is you cannot have an effective violence prevention program without taking head-on the issue of domestic or intimate partner violence, and it's for the reasons we just said. And so there are things that the employer can do if they know that somebody's involved in that, and that means there needs to be a culture that says, we recognize that this is an epidemic throughout our country. and that we recognize people are involved in this and we care about you. And so if you come forward, we're going to do what we can to help you. And we want to help you be safe, but we also are concerned about what? We're concerned about the entire workforce itself. But we can't do much if we don't know it exists. And so part of that awareness training, when you talk about how do we train all our employees, is what are some of those red flags that somebody might be involved in a domestic or intimate partner violence relationship. Not to meddle in their business, but at a minimum, they're going to be distracted. At a minimum, they're not performing how they could because they're dealing with all this noise in their personal lives. And so we want to help get them on focus, and we also want to keep the workspace safe. So that's why we talk about, here in October, Domestic Violence Awareness Month. It's critical to make sure that our workplace violence prevention programs and our threat assessment programs, we've considered the issue of domestic or intimate partner violence, and we have strategies to deal with it head on. All right, thank you. Stay safe, and best wishes to you.